The young German pilot was barely 19 years old when war placed him alone in the sky. His training had been fast, harsh and unforgiving, meant to prepare him for survival, not glory. On this day his mission was simple, a routine solo patrol across open airspace. His fighter moved smoothly through the clouds, the engine steady, the instruments calm, nothing suggested danger. The sky felt empty, wide and silent as he scanned the horizon. Distant shapes slowly appeared. At first they seemed harmless, but within seconds they became clear, enemy aircraft, many of them flying together in perfect formation. The sight tightened his chest. He was completely outnumbered. Every rule he had learned demanded retreat. Turning away seemed logical, but logic did not guarantee survival. Turning back would expose his aircraft against open sky, making him an easy target. He understood this instantly. Panic tried to rise, but he forced it down. He chose to think instead. The sky was not empty space, it was terrain. Light, altitude and angle mattered as much as weapons. He remembered a lesson shared quietly by an older pilot: never fight where the enemy expects you to be. Numbers create confidence, and confidence creates blind spots. That thought steadied him. He adjusted his altitude, lowering himself beneath the enemy formation, and let the sun fall behind him from above. His aircraft blended into the glare. The enemy planes moved forward unaware. He studied them carefully, their spacing, their rhythm, their confidence. He was not thinking about destroying 40 aircraft, he was thinking about surviving the next moment. Fear was present but controlled. He waited until the distance closed, until the timing felt right, then he acted using gravity. He accelerated upward, striking suddenly into the formation. One enemy aircraft was hit before its pilot could react. Smoke burst into the sky. The German pilot did not stay. He rolled away instantly, diving back into cover. Confusion spread immediately. Radios filled with voices searching for answers. Pilots looked in every direction but found nothing. The attacker was gone. The young pilot circled wide, watching disorder grow. He understood fear spreads faster than fire. He returned again from a different angle. Another short, precise attack, another disappearance. The enemy formation began to loosen. Pilots drifted apart, trying to protect themselves. Shots were fired at shadows. Some aircraft turned sharply, losing control. Others fled. Smoke trails marked the sky. Fuel burned quickly. Sweat filled his helmet. His arms ached from constant movement, yet his mind stayed calm. He never chased. He never stayed long enough to strike, then vanish again and again. Minutes stretched endlessly. The enemy believed they faced many attackers. Calls for help echoed across radios, but none arrived. The lone German pilot had turned confusion into a weapon. He was no longer reacting, he was controlling the fight. As fuel warnings began to appear, he knew the battle could not last forever, but the sky had already changed. What began as an impossible situation had become something else entirely. The enemy was broken, scattered, afraid, and the young pilot was still alone. This was only the beginning of a story that would later be whispered among pilots, not defined by numbers but by one impossible move made at exactly the right moment. The battle did not slow after the first attacks. Instead it grew heavier, louder and more dangerous. The enemy pilots were no longer confident, they were confused, and fear had entered their minds. The young German pilot felt the shift instantly. He could sense it in the way aircraft moved, no longer steady, no longer unified. They were reacting, not planning. He stayed low, letting clouds and light protect him. His engine sound vanished into the wind. Every movement was deliberate, every second mattered. Fuel continued to burn and he was aware of it, but he refused to rush. Rushing meant mistakes, mistakes meant death. He watched the enemy formation break into smaller groups. Pilots tried to cover each other, but fear made coordination difficult. Some climbed too high, others turned too sharply, exposing themselves. The young pilot waited for the right moment. He attacked only isolated aircraft, never the group. He rose suddenly, struck briefly, then disappeared again. Each time the enemy fired back, it was too late. They were aiming at where he had been, not where he was. The sky filled with smoke and sharp turns. Radios screamed warnings. Some pilots shouted that they were under attack by multiple fighters. Others demanded orders that never came. The young pilot understood now that he had taken control of the battle without numbers, without support, only by understanding. Fear and movement. His aircraft shook under the pressure of constant maneuvering. His arms were heavy, his breathing controlled inside the cockpit. Heat and tension pressed against him, but his focus never broke. He remembered another lesson: never stay where danger expects you to remain. He kept moving, changing altitude, speed and direction so quickly that tracking him became impossible. One enemy aircraft attempted to chase him, diving hard and firing blindly. The German pilot let it follow, then suddenly cut speed, forcing the enemy to overshoot. In that instant he turned, struck once and vanished again. The chasing aircraft fell trailing smoke. The remaining enemy pilots saw it happen. Panic spread faster. Some turned away, attempting to escape. Others stayed but flew without discipline. Collisions nearly occurred as pilots struggled to avoid one another. The sky that once belonged to the enemy now worked against them. The young pilot did not celebrate. He did not count victories. He measured time, fuel and opportunity. He was aware that his aircraft could fail at any moment, that a single mistake would end everything, yet fear no longer controlled him. It sharpened his awareness. Every sound, vibration and shadow mattered. The enemy formation was now completely broken. No clear leader, no unified movement, just scattered aircraft trying to survive. The German pilot made his final calculated passes, forcing the remaining enemies to flee. He did not chase them beyond necessity. He knew his limit. When fuel warnings flashed again brighter than before, he turned away, climbing slowly toward safer air. Behind him the battlefield faded. Smoke drifted across the sky, marking where confidence had collapsed. The fight was not officially over, but it was decided. The impossible had already happened. One pilot alone had rewritten the balance of the sky. As he headed home, his body finally felt the exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly, his muscles burned, but his mind remained clear. He had survived not by strength but by understanding, timing, patience and fear. The story was not finished yet, but this chapter was complete. The young German pilot continued his relentless attacks, knowing the battle was far from over. Every movement was precise and calculated. The enemy formation was scattered but still dangerous. Pilots were desperate, attempting unpredictable maneuvers to survive. Some fired blindly at shadows, some collided with one another. Confusion spread rapidly across the sky. The young pilot stayed calm, his hands steady on the controls. He observed the patterns of fear in their movements and used it against them. Each strike was brief and surgical, a quick pass followed by immediate withdrawal. He never lingered enough to be targeted. He attacked only when opportunity was absolute. The sky was filled with smoke trails of destroyed planes and the sound of engines screaming through the air. The enemy could no longer maintain formation. The pilots were reacting to his presence. Every movement was influenced by the unpredictable attacks of one lone aircraft. He knew the value of patience and timing. He did not let excitement or adrenaline push him into reckless moves. Fuel was burning rapidly, but he calculated every second to maximize efficiency. He watched one enemy aircraft climb too high, exposing its underbelly. He dived from below, striking precisely, causing the plane to trail smoke and lose control. Another aircraft turned too sharply and stalled. He swooped in, hitting it, and then vanished into a cloud before the enemy could regroup. He attacked again from a different angle, striking another plane. The radios screamed chaos, confusion, panic filled the enemy formation. The pilots believed they were being attacked by multiple fighters. Some attempted to flee, some tried to reform, but coordination was impossible. Every move they made played into his plan. The German pilot became an unseen presence, a ghost in the sky, appearing only long enough to strike. Each maneuver drained his strength, but his focus remained unbroken. The aircraft vibrated under the strain of continuous high-speed maneuvers, but he trusted its integrity. He understood that fear could be a weapon if used properly. He never attacked recklessly. He allowed the enemy to make mistakes and punished them swiftly. Minutes stretched endlessly. Sweat ran into his eyes. Inside the cockpit his arms ached from constant control inputs, yet his mind remained razor sharp. He changed altitude, direction and speed constantly, keeping himself unpredictable. The enemy could not anticipate his next move. They saw only sudden strikes and then empty air. He attacked isolated targets, leaving the larger group disorganized. Each successful hit increased the pressure on the remaining enemy aircraft. Collisions occurred as pilots tried to avoid him but could not maintain formation. The German pilot kept calculating angles and momentum, remaining aware of every threat and opportunity. Each time he dove, he did so from the perfect height. Each time he climbed, he timed it to stay invisible until the last moment. The sky had turned into a battlefield of psychology, not just weapons. He became the master of the fight, controlling fear and confusion without backup or support. Fuel warnings flashed repeatedly, but he refused to break rhythm. He understood that one mistake could end everything. Yet careful patience ensured success. The enemy formation had collapsed, partially fleeing, partially destroyed. The young German pilot was still alone and still in control. His body was exhausted, his senses strained, but he continued the calculated assault. He knew the fight was turning decisively in his favor, and each passing moment made the impossible feel achievable. This chapter of the battle would later be studied among pilots as an example of timing, precision and fear manipulation. The sky was his domain for now, and he remained undetected yet omnipresent, a single pilot rewriting the rules of engagement with courage, patience and skill. The young German pilot knew that fuel was becoming critical, but he refused to panic. The enemy formation was broken and fear dominated their movements. He had already gained control of the battlefield without reinforcement or backup. His focus remained sharp, every maneuver calculated and deliberate. He attacked again from below, striking isolated enemy planes and then disappearing instantly into clouds. The remaining aircraft tried to regroup, but coordination was impossible. They were reacting to his Unpredictable movements constantly looking for him but finding nothing. Each pass he made increased confusion and fear. Some enemy pilots fled, leaving others exposed. The sky was filled with smoke trails from damaged and destroyed planes. The German pilot understood that patience and timing were his greatest weapons. He did not rely on aggression alone but on exploiting the mistakes and overconfidence of his opponents. Each maneuver required precision and endurance. His aircraft vibrated under the stress of repeated high-speed turns, dives and climbs, yet it remained intact. He trusted the plane and his training above all. He controlled his fear and used the enemy fear against them. Every sudden attack seemed to come from multiple directions, forcing pilots to miscalculate and collide. The young pilot never stayed too long in one area. He was always moving, changing speed, altitude and direction, making it impossible to predict his next strike. The battle continued for what felt like hours, yet he maintained discipline and focus. Sweat ran into his eyes, his arms ached, but his mind remained clear. He struck again, hitting another plane that had overextended its turn and vanished into the clouds before retaliation could occur. The radios among the enemy screamed warnings, commands and confusion, but no effective counter came. The sky that had belonged to the enemy was now controlled by one lone pilot. Every movement of his created opportunity and fear. Every escape of an enemy plane reinforced the collapse of their formation. Finally, as fuel warnings became urgent, he began his calculated retreat toward safer airspace. His attacks became fewer and only to prevent regrouping. The enemy was demoralized, scattered, and no longer coordinated. The impossible feat of one pilot challenging an entire formation was near completion as he leveled his aircraft toward the horizon. He could see the aftermath: smoke trails fading, broken aircraft drifting, and enemy pilots desperately trying to find order. He had survived not by recklessness but by timing, calculation and understanding the psychology of fear. The sky remained dangerous but the balance had shifted decisively in his favor. This chapter would later be remembered among pilots as the day one young German pilot alone controlled the battlefield with skill, precision and courage. Landing would prove as challenging as the battle itself. The young German pilot approached the airfield with extreme caution. Fuel was almost gone, his aircraft heavily strained from hours of high-speed maneuvers and sharp turns. He carefully adjusted his approach, relying on skill and experience. The ground crew watched in tense silence as he descended. The aircraft touched down with precision, every movement controlled. Despite exhaustion, his body was heavy, sweat covering his face and hands, his arms trembling slightly from constant strain. Inside the cockpit, the young pilot climbed out and took a moment to breathe. Ground crews and fellow soldiers looked on in disbelief as reports began to circulate of the scale of destruction above. They learned that dozens of enemy aircraft had been destroyed, damaged or forced to flee, all by a single pilot alone. No immediate celebration occurred. War demanded focus and the mission was not over yet. Among those who had witnessed it, the story spread quickly. The young pilot remained humble, silent, aware that survival had depended on discipline, timing and patience, not luck or recklessness. He had pushed his aircraft to the limit, tested his own endurance and outmaneuvered fear with clarity and calculation. His hands still tingled from the control inputs, his mind replaying every maneuver, analyzing each decision made in the heat of battle. He knew the impossible had been achieved but also knew the war was far from over. He had demonstrated the potential of skill alone against overwhelming odds. His story would travel among pilots, becoming a lesson in patience, precision and courage. The sky would never forget the presence of a single German pilot who had rewritten the balance of power above with nothing but understanding, movement and fear. He had survived the impossible by respecting it and controlling it. Every glance at the airfield reminded him of the fragility of life in the sky and the weight of responsibility resting on a single pair of hands. He did not need accolades, he needed to live, to fly another day. His mind was already calculating future maneuvers, patterns and strategies for what lay ahead. The day had tested him and the sky had answered. The legend of one pilot alone controlling the battlefield without support, without numbers, had begun, and his name would be remembered quietly among those who understood the sky. The young German pilot returned to the airfield knowing the battle above was only one part of the war. Every mission demanded vigilance and discipline. He inspected his aircraft carefully, checking for damage and fuel levels. His mind replayed the events in the sky, every maneuver, every strike, every decision. Each detail mattered. He understood that survival depended on preparation as much as skill. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the airfield. The sky that had been filled with smoke and chaos hours before was now calm, but the memory of the fight lingered in every pilot who had witnessed it. The young pilot sat quietly in the cockpit, reflecting on the control he had gained through timing, patience and understanding fear. He had turned an impossible situation into a calculated victory without arrogance or unnecessary risk. His actions had taught a lesson about the power of discipline and observation. The enemy would remember the day when one aircraft alone changed the outcome of a battle they would fly more cautiously, reconsider formations and tactics. His influence extended beyond his immediate victory. It was a psychological triumph as much as a physical one. He realized that courage alone could not win a fight. Precision, awareness and patience were equally vital. Each future mission would carry the memory of this day. Every pilot would take with them the understanding that even alone one could impose control, if they used the environment and timing wisely. The young German pilot felt exhaustion deep in his muscles but a quiet satisfaction in his mind. He knew he had tested himself beyond limits and succeeded. He had survived what others would have deemed impossible. The airfield lights glimmered softly as night approached. His comrades would speak in hushed tones of the extraordinary events above all. The young pilot remained modest, understanding that every flight carried danger and opportunity. He was ready to face whatever came next with the same discipline and focus that had allowed him to survive and dominate the impossible. The story of his solo fight would circulate quietly, becoming legend not for bragging rights but for lessons in skill, patience and understanding of the sky. The German pilot had achieved what many thought impossible and had done so with clarity, courage and mastery of every element within his control. The day ended, but the influence of his actions would continue shaping the minds of those who flew with and against him for the remainder of the war. After the battle above, the young German pilot continued to fly missions with caution and awareness. Every sortie reminded him of the fragility of life in the sky. The enemy had learned to be wary. Formations became wider and tighter. Pilots flew with more discipline, but he also knew that the advantage he had gained in that battle had shifted the perception of what a single pilot could achieve. He studied the enemy carefully, observing patterns, weaknesses and tendencies. He practiced patience, precision and timing every flight, honing skills that could turn impossible situations into manageable challenges. The sky itself had taught him lessons that no classroom could convey. Every maneuver in the past battle replayed in his mind, reinforcing strategies and insights. He adapted continuously, changing approaches depending on the enemy and conditions. His colleagues respected his skill, but he remained humble, understanding that survival depended on constant vigilance. The story of the impossible fight spread quietly among pilots, becoming legend, a lesson in strategy, patience and understanding fear without relying on brute force. Every mission was approached with discipline and focus. The enemy continued to pose threats, but the young pilot applied the same principles: patience, observation and precision. He controlled his fear and turned the enemy fear into advantage. His presence alone in the sky influenced the behavior of enemy pilots, forcing caution and hesitation. His reputation became a psychological factor. In addition to skill on every flight, he evaluated altitude, speed, angles and light conditions, considering every variable. The lessons from that day above the clouds became a part of his instinct, guiding every movement. Every time he faced overwhelming odds, he remembered how calculation, timing and composure could change outcomes. He shared insights with fellow pilots quietly through demonstration and example, never boasting but teaching by action. The young German pilot understood that the sky was a domain of opportunity and danger where one mind could influence many if used wisely. He applied these lessons every day, every flight, reinforcing discipline and control. The enemy feared the unknown, the unpredictable and the precise. The pilot had become both visible and invisible at the same time, controlling the battlefield without numbers or backup. His influence extended beyond his victories, shaping strategy, tactics and mindset of both friend and foe. In every engagement he approached every sortie with the calm precision of one who had survived impossible odds and learned from them. History would never fully capture the events of that day. Only the sky and the young German pilot knew the full truth. Every decision, every maneuver, every strike had been measured and calculated. Fear had been transformed into an instrument, a tool to control the battlefield rather than a force to paralyze him. The enemy formation had broken apart, chaos had reigned, and yet the pilot had remained composed, disciplined and precise. He understood that survival in the sky depended on timing, observation and mastery of one's own reactions. The aftermath of the battle was quiet on the surface, but the effects reverberated through the enemy ranks. Each pilot who had faced him would carry the memory of the unpredictable attacks into future missions, and formations would fly more cautiously. The young pilot reflected on his actions, understanding that courage alone was insufficient. Strategy and control were equally vital. Each subsequent mission reinforced the lessons learned that day. Patience, timing, awareness and precise execution were the keys to surviving and dominating impossible odds. The sky itself became a teacher, testing his instincts, judgment and composure. He knew that his success depended on continuous adaptation and focus. Every flight since that battle was approached with the same care and observation, using the environment, the light, the clouds and the fear of the enemy to his advantage. His reputation grew quietly among comrades and enemies alike, not through boastful tales but Through demonstration of skill and control, one aircraft alone had shifted the balance of power in the sky. For those moments the young German pilot internalized the understanding. That power did not always come from numbers. Sometimes it came from one calculated move executed with mastery and discipline. The day ended with the sun setting over the airfield, casting long shadows, a reminder of the danger, the exhaustion, and the achievement. The pilot had survived what many would consider impossible, and had done so through patience, observation, and courage. His legacy became a lesson that even alone, even outnumbered, a single mind properly focused could influence events beyond expectation. The sky remembered, and those who flew it would never forget the presence of a pilot who turned fear into strategy, skill into survival, and chaos into control. Every future engagement would carry traces of that day and the understanding that one impossible move could alter the course of battle forever.